I'm joined now by Chelsey Chandler Ruppersburg, who is a graduate student at Emory University School of Medicine. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You are one of the founding members of the Emory Science Advocacy Network. Tell me a little bit about what you do.
So Emory Science Advocacy Network, or eSCAN as we call it, is a student group that we started about a year ago, involved in getting students, postdoctoral fellows, faculty, involved in advocating for science, both at a local level and a national level. So we want to inform students on how to get involved in politics and how to get politicians interested in science so that we can advocate for more science funding.
Well, and this has a lot to do with your future because you want to do the research, but let's face it, there is a critical problem with federal funding for research. So you're talking to the politicians about this.
Yes, and so when we go to meet with politicians, we'll briefly explain what we do as scientists and then explain to them the funding situation that we're in. And as a scientist who is in a lab that is currently experiencing funding issues, it's very relevant to me, and I can sit there and explain to them, we can't afford to buy the supplies to do this experiment, and this experiment would help us understand, for example, how cancer cells move. And that's why it's so important that we really invest in science funding, because the small things that we do in lab every day can have such big implications later. And when we cut funding, obviously we're limiting the amount of research that we can do. And so it's really interesting when you meet with a politician, because a lot of them, even though they know, for example, that the money comes from the NIH and how the NIH is funded, they don't really understand exactly what we're using the money for, or how graduate students, how, for example, our stipends, our scholarships are paid for by the NIH money. And so explaining to them that not only is it funding research, but our education is a big selling point to them. And that's what we want to explain to them and sort of get in their mind. You're educating, you're informing, and we're doing this great research on top of all of it. So.
I think in terms of educating the politicians, you've also, I'm hearing, learned a lesson yourself that other researchers may get some value from, and that is the way you talk about science, the way you talk about research.
Yeah, so that's been one of the biggest hurdles, and it was for me as well, beginning really understanding that it's important, the main objective should be to make science approachable to everyone. So science should be approachable to a politician, to your parents, because we want everyone to understand what we're doing and be invested in the science that we're doing. And so we've learned that to really explain what we're doing to, for example, a politician, we need to take a step back. So you may work on a specific protein and understanding if it's phosphorylated at some site, but that doesn't really mean a lot to the general public. And so it's important to put these things into a broader context. Is this related to a disease? Because that's what people can relate to. And that's what we're trying to get people to understand is, you're not lying, you know, it's really just making science approachable by stepping back and explaining it so that everyone can understand it.
Right, and simplifying it doesn't diminish the importance of the research.
Exactly.
Certainly. Do you think that there are other options in addition to federal funding? I've seen online some of these sites, these GoFundMe or other such sites. Do you think that those might be valuable in raising money for research as well?
So I can't say that I've really looked into those options, and I think the way our group is looking at science funding is, so there are these two roads. We can either find new ways to fund science, or we can try and improve the ways that we already have, so the NIH funding, and that's really what we're focused on. There's a system in effect that is working at some level, and we're trying to improve that and make it better. So, or not make it better, but change, enhance it, I guess. So this, you know, we already obviously have the grant peer review system and other scientists critically reviewing how, you know, what projects are supposed to do. And I think that's something that we all feel comfortable with. And it's just getting politicians to understand that this source of funding is really important and that we need to keep it going. These other ideas about Kickstarter projects and things like that, I think feeds into the idea of having to sensationalize science at a level, and that's not something I personally am comfortable with. So that's why we've focused on this, getting politicians to really invest in funding for the NIH.
You sound very enthusiastic about it. Do you have a concern about the level of funding for research as a young scientist?
It's definitely at the forefront of my mind because I want to stay in science. I love what I do, and I know how important the work that I do and all the people around me are doing. And so you think about, well, where am I going to be in 10 years? And hopefully it's in a lab of my own. But obviously everyone can't be a PI now because there's just not the money to do it. And so it's forcing us as graduate students to really think ahead, like what are my other career options? What if this doesn't pan out? If the funding situation doesn't improve, is this a viable option for me? Or do I need to start looking at other alternative careers? And so, we try and encourage people to do what they love. And if you love doing science, then you need to be an advocate for science funding so that in 10 years you can be in your own lab.
Is there any talk among young people about potentially going overseas instead of switching careers, but maybe going to a place where the funding might be a little better in science?
So as a graduate student, we haven't encountered that as much, but there are a handful of young faculty, for example, at Emory, who recently, before they came to Emory, said that there were much more competitive offers for them overseas as a faculty member. So I think that that's something we might face down the road, and definitely something that when we talk to politicians, we tell them. Not only have we lost top researchers in our lab, for example, who've gone back to China because they can get positions over there, but it's now something that we're going to start facing, and we want to keep a lot of our science here because we've been trained here, and so that's actually another great talking point when we meet with politicians.
Well, Chelsey, thank you so much. I think your energy and your focus on raising funds for science is really going to make a difference. Good luck.
Thank you.